I consider myself first and foremost a storyteller. I tell stories. Some of them are true, some of them are fiction, some of them are based on the truth, and not all in the same genre. So obviously my news stories are true. But I knew from the time I was 5 years old that I wanted to be a writer. Probably even before, my mom can tell you. And so I had made up my mind that I was going to publish stuff. Yes, my first book. My mother, my personal archivist, has this and many others by Kalilah, age 7. I had every intention of publishing it and being a bestseller all over the world. But by the time I got a bit older, people looked at me and said, "Writer? You can't be no writer. Writer don't make no money, especially in Belize." And they had a point. It's difficult to earn a living off being a writer. And I heard Yasser use the phrase art workers. And I started thinking to myself, right around the time of high school, what else can I do to still pursue my passion of writing, yet be able to make a living, to pursue this as a career? And I came up with the bright idea of being a journalist. And so in high school, started the Compre newspaper, BCS newspaper, interviewed our new principal, Mr. Anthony, interviewed students about various issues. BCS females on the rise, but where are the males? And that's still an important issue in education today, where you have young women outperforming young men the higher you go in levels of education. And I was interested in this in high school, and I decided this is going to be my career path, journalism. That's how I'm going to do this, because I am interested in the overall human experience, documenting that, writing that in creative ways, and sharing that with an audience. Sixth form, I went to SJC, had a very special teacher, Miss Holland. Before sixth form, though, in fourth form, I worked with the government press office for a while with some of these same guys you see here today. Interviewed the Prime Minister, who was very popular at the time. It was around the year 2000. And yeah, so that was pretty fun. And then in sixth form, did English literature with Miss Holland, which was the closest thing to writing and journalism that I could get. Following that, moved on to Fordham University in New York, where I had the opportunity to study communication studies with a concentration in journalism. So I was like, yes, I'm in the media capital of the world now. I have the world at my fingertips, but I was never desirous of staying in New York. I always wanted to come back to Belize. Now, one of the first classes I took at Fordham, Journalism 101, Introduction to Journalism, was with Professor Arthur Hall, who writes for the New York Times. And he introduced us to this concept of readability statistics. What are readability statistics? They are this thing in Microsoft Word that helps you to determine, here it is, helps to show you how readable your document is. You can select the option under spelling and grammar check, show readability stats, and it tells you how many passive sentences are in your document, how easy it is to read, what grade level can read. So according to this, someone in grade 6 can understand this presentation, which means Professor Hall taught me well. Because I came from the school of big words, and I was using, from Ms. Holland's class in SJC, obsequious and milieu, and we were deconstructing paragraph-long sentences. And now I was learning the principle that good communication is not necessarily about impressing people with your vocabulary, at least not in journalism. Good communication is about this: small words, short sentences, because the objective is to be, as a journalist and as a communicator, is to be able to reach as many people as possible. So if you can reach somebody who only has a grade 6 level education, and they can understand what you're trying to tell them, then you are successful. As a communicator, it's not about using the grandiose, flowery language. It's about being able to get through to somebody. And so we had to rewrite our stories for Professor Hall in order to get it through Microsoft Word's readability statistics and get it to an appropriate level. And so it comes back to the basic principle that I always hear people talking about The KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. Sure you've heard that one before. You're not serving the public if they cannot understand you. You're not. And I think journalists have a responsibility not to just regurgitate things that are presented to them. So if you get a press release and you don't understand what on earth this press release is trying to say, and you just go ahead and rewrite it and broadcast it, if you didn't understand it, how can you expect other people to understand it? If you don't know math and you're trying to teach somebody math, you think they're going to learn math? They won't learn it. Part of the problem that we have. So we have a responsibility then, if we don't understand, to find out what does it mean. Call somebody who knows, do some research, go on the internet, and then break it down so that the person, the average person, even a child, could understand it. Which brings me to one of my personal principles as a journalist. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Makes sense, right? Ask a lot of questions. Explain things simply. And I owe that all to Professor Hall's readability statistics. So after Fordham, I came back to Belize around 2005. And shortly, I joined the Krem organization. Recognize that guy? That's what our set used to look like on Wake Up Belize Morning Vibes years ago. Had all the national heroes up there. And shortly after I joined the organization, our news editor, Vonetta Burrell, fellow Belmopanese, resigned. And Ann Wade, who was the co-host of the morning show, she also resigned. And I was promoted to both positions within 3 months of working there. 22 years old, fresh out of college, green, but full of ambition and education. But I had no idea what I was doing outside of readability statistics and that kind of thing. But I did have a big concern in being asked to play these two roles. And it was a concern about objectivity. Because you learn in journalism school that journalists are not supposed to take sides. You're supposed to be neutral, right? So here I was being asked to be news editor and be neutral, but then also being asked to play this role on a morning show and do the exact opposite and have an opinion and be very opinionated about everything that happens. So I was concerned at first. I said, but I can't do these two things. And Mo said, no, man, don't worry about it. And Adeli Ramos, assistant editor of the Mandala, said to me, but journalists are entitled to an opinion too. And I thought about it, and I said, maybe it can work. Well, we'll see. We'll see how this goes. One of my college textbooks actually reconciles it this way. The elements of journalism. It says, journalists must maintain an independence from those they cover. This applies even to those who work in the realm of opinion, criticism, and commentary. It is this independence of spirit and mind, rather than neutrality, that journalists must keep in focus. Editorialists and opinion journalists are not neutral. Their credibility is rooted instead in the same dedication to accuracy, verification, the larger public interest, and a desire to inform that all other journalists subscribe to. Another writer from the New York Times, Anthony Lewis, put it this way: journalists who end up writing columns of opinion have a point of view, but they still prize facts above all. We find facts, and from them, we draw a conclusion. So now, how does one achieve objectivity when the entire world that we experience is subjective? How can it be fair to ask anyone to be objective when everything that we've experienced in our lives shape our point of view? Who we are, where we live, where we grew up, our parents' point of view, our religion, our gender, all of these things shape us. And that is how these good writers reconciled it. I've tried to incorporate this way of thinking into my own stories, into my own approach as a journalist. For example, one of the stories I did recently in Jamaica concerned the government's buyback of their Petrocaribe debt. Now, Petrocaribe, the government owed Venezuela $3.2 billion for Petrocaribe, for oil that they've been importing over the years. They had an opportunity to pay off that debt for just 1.5 billion US dollars. So 54% discount. Sounds like a good deal, right? Yeah? Until the opposition pointed out that they had to borrow the money on the international capital markets to buy back the debt. And they were borrowing not 1.5 but 2 billion at 7% interest rate over 30 years versus the conditions under the existing Petro-Caribbean agreement. They owed 3.2 at just 1% interest rate. So 1% is a much better interest rate than 7, and it would be paid off in 25 years. So which one is the better deal? How can you know? And now, this is where our reporting sometimes, in trying to be objective, sometimes leaves us lacking. Because then you just have a journalist saying, well, the government says it's good, and the opposition says it's bad, and they leave you to make up your own mind. And you look at this, and you're like, well, I have no idea which one is true. And so in my own reporting, I took it a step further. I said, well, I have to take the facts and from them draw a conclusion. And so I did the math, walked my listeners through the math, and concluded that it was indeed a good deal to pay off the Petro-Caribbean debt early, although marginally so. So I think that we need to do our listeners and our readers and our viewers a service by going further than just what one side says and what the other side says, and taking them and providing some form of analysis. And some may call it subjectivity. There is space for subjectivity. But in Belizean journalism especially, we have to be very aware of that very tenuous line and not cross it. Because in our news situation is much different from Jamaica and the USA. Our journalism is very subjective, isn't it? It's very editorial. And many times there's too much interpretation in our news. And that's fine to me when it's coming from like the Belize Times or the Guardian, Positive Vibes, Wave Radio, because you already know their affiliation. And they've disclosed, you know who owns them, you know what their point of view is going to be, and you know how to interpret what they're saying. But when it comes from the independent media now, you're not so sure what side they're on, if they're on a side. And when you editorialize your news to such a great extent that many of them do, it makes people naturally become suspicious of them, doesn't it? It makes you wonder, oh, who paid them off? What side they're upon? And it becomes this evolving guessing game as to who this particular media house or journalist is supporting. I do believe in full transparency. If you as a journalist or a media house have a point of view, a political point of view, you ought to disclose it. You ought to just say out front, I'm supporting this particular person or this particular party, so that your listeners and readers can, know how to perceive what you're telling them. So all of these thoughts were in my mind back in 2005 when I joined Krem. Now, you remember 2005? That was quite a year in Belize's political history. There was so much going on, and I was baptized by fire. Like, I came back just in time for all the drama. You had the trade union protests. You had the telecommunications blackout. I remember one morning, Mose and I did an entire show, and this is a call-in talk show. Did an entire call-in talk show with no calls. That was quite a thing. I never forget it. You had the Prime Minister's house was stoned. You had looting on Albert Street. That was in April 18th, I believe. You had all these issues coming together and all this social unrest in 2005, and guess what? It was a great time to be a journalist because you're in the thick of things. And if ever I wasn't sure that this was my chosen calling, well, 2005 certainly solidified that because those stories needed to be told. By 2008, though, as young people tend to do, started to get restless, started to feel like, okay, what else is going on? What else is happening? Where else should I go? What else should I do? And I felt like I had hit a ceiling in Belizean media, because once you're news editor and on a talk show, I mean, where else can you go to grow? There's no room for growth where I was. And so I made the decision to go to the University of the West Indies, Caribbean Institute of Media and Communications in Kingston to study. I did communication studies, my master's degree. And it was good, but it still wasn't exactly what I wanted to be doing. Sitting in a classroom, I wanted hands-on experience, hands-on learning. And so right as I was finishing up that degree, I got the opportunity to work at CVM Television, which is the second largest television station in Jamaica. So of course, I jumped at that opportunity, thoroughly enjoyed it, and once again was baptized by fire. What happened next? Before I tell you what happened next, I had the opportunity also to learn about standards, because we don't have many standards in our media. The news starts when it starts, sometimes 6:30-ish, sometimes 6:34, 6:35, and it ends when they don't have anything else to say. So it doesn't necessarily, news won't necessarily end at 7 or 7, it ends when they just run out of news. And so they're not that type of standards. Over there, no, you know your story, you have the pressure to keep your story 2 minutes. 2 minutes or under. If you have it's a very important story, you might get 2.5 minutes to tell your story. News must start on time, it must end on time, because you have advertisers, you have other programs coming up. And so it was refreshing for me to work in an industry that actually had some type of standards. And I think that we here in Belize need to respect our listeners and our viewers' time more, so that people can plan their lives. You can't be sitting there in front of the TV forever waiting for the last story to come on, and you want to change a channel. It's not fair. So anyway, 2010, started working at CVM, baptized by fire again. I started working there when? Sometime around, in May is when the security forces stormed Tivoli Gardens. I'm sure you all heard of it. In search of notorious drug lord Christopher Dudus Coke. And people were fleeing Kingston, like there were lines to get out of the city. Nobody wanted to be there because it was announced that this was going to happen. There was a state of emergency. And guess where I was? I was down there in my bulletproof vest, of course.
On Spanish Town Road, this woman was shot just a few feet away from our news team as we prepared for a live broadcast.
A woman was just shot right next to where I'm standing. This is the scene here on Spanish Town Road and between Maxfield Avenue and Waltham Park. The shot came literally out of nowhere just moments ago. There were scores of people littering the streets here. There you go again, another barrage of heavy gunfire. The area coming under attack. So I remember the first time I did a story in a notorious area in Jamaica, and my news editor said to me very casually, "Make sure you take a bulletproof vest from the security on your way out." I was like, "Bulletproof vest? Where are you sending me?" But that was preparation for this, and I had seen other reporters before, on the air running, and I was like, okay, I'm going to be brave, but not stupid. I'll just stand there, finish my sentence, and then get out of there, and that's what I did. And this event, 74 people were killed. 74 by the security forces. And as we speak right now, there's a commission of inquiry going on in Kingston looking into exactly what happened on those 2 days in Tivoli Gardens. It's an event that changed Jamaica's history. It changed their trajectory. I would say it's equivalent of 9/11 to the United States. That's what this was for Jamaica, because it's still impacting so many things in ordinary people's lives. But covering this event also was another marker in my career that made me know that I was doing the right thing, that I had found my calling. I was recording history, documenting history, and not just what happened, but how people felt about what happened, which is just as important as the facts themselves. Now, after CVM, I moved on to CEEN TV, Caribbean Entertainment Everyday Network, a diaspora television station targeting Caribbean people living in the US and Canada. And I was all excited about that because I'm like, yes, I've always wanted to do more regional work, to reach out to our brothers and sisters across the Caribbean and see what their experiences are like. And like William mentioned, be the embodiment of the CSME, because I saw myself as a regional person, a Caribbean person. And so I enjoyed doing that job and being able also to give Belizeans a voice, because I feel like our issues are often ignored in regional media. You don't get a lot of reports coming out of Belize on regional media for some reason. So this to me was the embodiment of regionalism and the CSME at its finest. Now, after working there a couple of years, I was recruited by Cliff Hughes on the far left, feared reporter, one of the most feared reporters in Jamaica, and his news team. When people see nationwide reporters coming, their knees start shaking because they know we're going to ask the tough questions. I've had politicians literally run away from me because they know nationwide is coming with the tough questions. But with all of that, when they say the next generation of news hounds, it's not an understatement. These people, this team right here, they dog out news. And I learned very quickly that in order to survive at this particular organization, you have to eat, sleep, and drink news. You have to be all about news 24/7. You have to watch all the TV news, record them if you're not going to be home. You have to read all the newspapers. You have to know everything that's happening at the drop of a hat. And worse, I was on morning radio, filling the very big shoes of Emily Crooks, who had left the station to pursue a career in law. And people expected of me what she used to provide. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a lot. And you end up putting in 12-hour, 14-hour days. You have to be up at 4 o'clock to be at work for 5 because the show starts at 6. Work all into the evening if you have to. A lot is expected of a person at this organization. It's been my toughest job to date by far, by far. But you see why, you see the quality of news that they produce. But it was what I was craving as well. I wanted this growth as a professional. I wanted to do work that was meaningful, that impacted people's lives. And I have the opportunity to do that at Nationwide. Now, I do a lot of business reporting at this particular station. Jamaican people are very interested in the economy, and for good reason. Right now, they're 3 years into an agreement with the IMF. As you all may know, IMF deals are tough. It's times of austerity. And so we dog out the numbers every quarter when they come out. How much did the economy grow by? How many new jobs were added or lost from the economy? What's the poverty level now? And that led to another opportunity at Business Access TV, where I work now also. So I have 2 jobs, Nationwide, and then when I finish that, I go over to Business Access TV and do some reporting for them as well. So I'm in radio and television. But I feel like these are some of the core issues that we should be focusing on here in Belizean media, especially now that it's election time, and not just the name calling. We should be having this debate and this discussion about these types of issues in the economy. So let's take a look at some of Belize's indicators recently. Second quarter 2005, the economy actually contracted by 1.6%. Poverty in 2009, nearly half of the country was poor. Poverty by internationally defined standards. And they don't have the updated figures, so I can't tell you how it compares to now. Unemployment, April 2015, 10.1%. Inflation, negative 1%. That's pretty good. Debt to GDP, 76%. Not as bad as Jamaica, 125%. That means you earn way less than you owe. So yeah. But how many people are aware of what these numbers really mean? How often do you hear them discussed in our local media? Not very often, because even though I'm abroad, I watch news every day, Belize news. The first thing I do after I come off the air at 9 o'clock, go check news, 7 and 5, what's in Belizean news? And you don't often hear this type of discussion. And are we satisfied with these numbers is what we should be talking about. Where did we come from? What were these numbers in 2008 and how do they compare to now? So have we improved under the Barrow administration or not? These are things we should be discussing. How do these numbers compare with other countries in the region, in the hemisphere, in the world? Are we where we want to be? Are we getting there? I don't hear these types of discussions, and it's very unfortunate. I think we, as media, have a responsibility to elevate the discourse. We do a grave injustice to our audiences when we allow the politicians to dominate the news with their bickering and their name-calling. We have a very important role as gatekeepers because we decide what goes on TV. And if we lead our newscast with somebody calling somebody another name and then leave the modicum of real debate for the very end of the news, which could be 7:30 or 8 o'clock, you don't know, when people have already tuned out and changed the channel, we're doing our audience a grave, grave injustice. And so we need to elevate the discourse. We need to ask the questions, and if they're not going to do it, if both our government and our opposition fails us in bringing these types of conversations to the House and to the public sphere, then we as media have a responsibility to fill that void and do it. So why do I do it? Why do I wake up at 4 a.m., get to work as early as I do? Why do I spend my nights reading voluminous reports, pouring through the budget book, which is a huge document? I do it because I love it, because I always wanted to write, as I told you in the beginning, but also because we need to know the truth. We need to know the truth as a people. I do it because we need accountability in public office. I do it because the stories need to be told. Thank you.